So as we go through, I'm going to start off with leadership. And I have to share with you that as I was putting this presentation together, my original intention was to first talk about, okay, what have we learned about gender bias in leadership? What do we know about how if a man and a woman did the exact same job, how they would be evaluated by their peers? What might we know about when a woman ascends into a new managerial position, what kinds of resistance she is likely to encounter from a team? And these things all exist, and they've all been documented using the scientific method so that we don't have a question about whether or not it's real. But what I did realize was, as I was looking at where we are with the science, that we're past that. And I think that that's really exciting news. And so I came to realize that I shouldn't give any air to the gender biases that have existed in leadership for years, because they're starting to matter a lot less. And so what I'm happy to say is that instead, when it comes to leadership, I'm only going to share with you some scientific findings. And I think that the conclusions from these hopefully will be self-evident. So these are 3 reputable studies. They have been peer-reviewed and then were written about in Harvard Business Review. And they're all from within the last 5 years. And I would say that that's some pretty compelling evidence about how women are doing in leadership. What is exciting is that a lot of different factors are starting to come together to give us more insight into what's actually happening. Not only are the progress that we've made over the last 50, 75 years is obviously has taken hold and taken root, but it's also given us the opportunity now to start building up decades worth of data. And so we're no longer having to guess, we're no longer having to make intuitive statements, and we're no longer having to make aspirational statements saying, like, wouldn't it be great if? Now we have the data to know. So if you had a suspicion that adding more women to the C-suite would lead to greater profitability, you were right. And if you started to suspect, I know men are supposed to be sort of more aspirational, or at least that's how they're sort of perceived. But actually, I see women making bolder choices at work. Yeah, you're correct. And when I've thought about sort of some of my male and female bosses, I realized actually, yeah, the women have been better bosses. And apparently that wasn't just my own experience. And sort of as I looked at these stats, which I thought were really exciting and really important, it reminded me of another study that's hugely important that I came across in my IO background, industrial and organizational psychology. And this was an article in 2003 by the social scientists were Ely and Carley. And what was special about this was that there had been enough experiments run that were looking at what were the impacts of men and women in leadership positions, that there was sufficient data to do what's called a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a very specific kind of statistical analysis that is able to look at multiple studies from multiple contexts and aggregate them into one massive study to look for trends. And it was by 2003 that sort of the next level of meta-analysis was even possible. Now, before I go into the findings of this, it's important to establish the idea of transformational versus transactional leadership, which is a very heavy organizational psychology concept, but one that has gained pretty wide acceptance over the last 25 years. And it's this idea that as a leader, there's kind of 2 different ways that we can drive motivation in our teams. So the first is called transactional, and it's exactly as it sounds. Your motivation is based on a transaction. You're doing your job to get a salary. You're doing your job well to be eligible for a promotion. Everything is a trade. Transactional leadership is linked to extrinsic motivation, which of the 2 motivations is weaker. Extrinsic means I'm doing this for a reward or to avoid a punishment. Transformational leadership, on the other hand, is linked with intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation means I'm doing this because I want to. Not surprisingly, transformational leadership is far more impactful. It gets people motivated because they believe in a vision, because they want to contribute to the team, and it drives people to I knew that was going to happen, to much greater heights. I've got to like hold my hands behind my back or something. So looking at men and women from the perspective of transactional versus transformational leadership, this is what they found. Men are more likely to be transactional leaders. That's a stat that stands on its own. It doesn't mean more likely than women. It means more than 50% of men end up leading in a transactional manner. And what it looks like is kind of what we described. And this is what happens in organizations that are being driven by transactional leadership. Women, on the other hand, are more likely to be transformational leaders, which means that with any woman leader, there's a better than 50% chance that she is, in fact, a transformational leader. And these are the results that happen there. And so I guess for me, the big conclusion and the big takeaway was that as you move forward in your careers as leaders, it's possible that people will talk to you about gender bias and how you should behave and how to be a leader. And my message to you is tell them to shut up, because in fact, when it comes to leadership, you're winning. You're doing it better. And so my ultimate message about this is don't believe anything that you hear about leadership and how it ought to be. Be true to yourself, because that's working better. And this isn't just a nice thing to say. It's not an aspirational statement. This is science. The same science that gives us medicine and put a human being on the moon is what produced these findings. So I hope that everyone is confident in knowing that your intuition as a leader is likely right, is more likely than not to be right. And so trust yourselves on that front.